Well, I apologize. I'm not sure why. We had a Zoom meeting this morning. Yeah, 14 minutes late. So I will call to order our City of Duval Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, May 5th at 5:44. This evening we have two main topics. One is COVID budget impacts. That's a 30-minute item. And our second item is our 2019-2020 budget amendments discussion with the finance department. I think most of us have seen the PowerPoint already that Dina provided for that. Well, to get us started, we'll go around and do the good of the order. If those of you that have under the participant screen, if you have something you want to share, you can certainly raise your hand using that. The other option is you can simply wave your hand and I'll do my best to catch you. Anything for good of the order. Councilmember McHenry.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw an idea by everyone to think about. I had a citizen contact me and just give us an idea about what about a tree planting ceremony honoring the class of 2020, maybe at McCormick Park or somewhere else that we want trees, and then possibly doing it every year. Just thinking of everything going on, she just wanted to pass that idea on to the city.
What a great idea. I like that. I've seen other cities doing many different things, but one nice thing about tree planting is it's often pretty permanent. And we might even be able to talk to Steve about doing something like that along 275th project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or one of our down parks. I think that's a great idea. We can certainly discuss that more and move that forward, but thank her for bringing that up.
Yeah,
I like that idea.
Yeah, I think it's good to get it on the radar now. We have time possibly before June to work on it if we wanted to.
Yeah. Well, we'll pick it out. I'm not an arborist, but I bet we could find a nice one that would last quite a while, probably outlast all of us. Other items for good of the order. Councilmember Napland.
Hi, I'll just keep this brief. I think some had seen some of the activity on 275th and received some letters, emails. Some people received calls from some constituents who had some concerns. And I just want to say, thank you to the mayor for responding. Steve reached out to me yesterday and we had a great conversation about it. I'm disappointed with how this project unfolded in some aspects, and instead of, pointing fingers and getting really frustrated, I'm trying to look forward and think about how we can potentially not have some of those conflicts in the future. So we don't have to have this conversation tonight, but just in the future, it would be nice to have a very clear timeline of outreach to community members and how council can understand if there's community concerns and just get the timing right. And then also when we talk about project costs and staying within a grant budget or project budget, just to really fully understand staff costs that go into that as well, because sometimes I think there's a little bit of a disconnect about, a project can really expand in scope and you don't really see it in the budget, but there's a very heavy investment of staff time and just understanding, the cost of that as well. So anyway, those are just kind of some lessons learned, and I hope we can move forward. I'm sad that some of our community members felt so frustrated, and I hope we can avoid that in the future.
Well, thank you for the feedback. For citizens that may not know, we have a $200,000 grant to redo the side of the road and put in a sidewalk, improve with some landscaping. We are looking at potentially doing some safety improvements to the 150th intersection there. So it's been quite a project, but we have had some concerns from citizens, and Director Liniszewski with Public Works has helped address those along with the mayor. Certainly, there's usually some communication things, Jennifer, what I hear you saying, and that don't always go as smoothly as we would like. I know the citizens I've talked to personally that live near the project were very mature and thoughtful in the way they brought their concerns forward. And I appreciate their approach, but they certainly were concerned about losing some of that buffer near their homes. And they shared some other safety things, some communication issues as well. So thank you for bringing that up. I think it's kind of an ongoing process here to try to make sure our communication is clear. Councilmember Langle?
Yes, thank you. This is something I've already brought up to Steve. We did it in the Finance and Administration Committee. And what I would like us to look at as a council is the format that we follow for all projects when they come forward. And we had this problem with the depot as well. We really need a presentation that shows the total development cost of a project. It has to disclose all the funding sources, whether they are committed, conditional, or being sought after and unknown. And I'd like us to come to some agreement around that, because both in the case of the depot and this project, there were costs that were incurred that are part of the $200,000 project, but in fact, we're already over the $200,000 grant. So we need to have that disclosure earlier in the process. And that's a form I would like to work on and present to council.
I've been involved with very few projects where they were right on the money.
No, that's not the purpose. It's really, but it's a way to track the project.
Yeah, and that's what I appreciate. I think your concern and suggestion about the process that we use as we work on these projects is really important to us. And I think we can certainly do a better job on some of our projects, sharpening them up a bit and making sure that the communication, not just with citizens, but with council as well, is such that we can monitor and see what some of those changes might be. One of the things when I talk to citizens, I did try to let them know how thankful and pleased we are with our outstanding staff, and they recognize that. They appreciated the thoughtfulness which with our staff got back to them. It's just a challenging issue, but certainly moving forward, I think we can look at some improvements to some of our process that we use and some of the details. Let's see, Director Leniszewski, I think you're up next.
Not to steal Dorothy's thunder, but I just wanted to share my screen real quick. Button. Maybe can I do that? There it is. And I know we're going to work on it, Dot, but I've been perusing in my spare time project charter forms. So we'll talk offline, but I had one pulled up and you mentioned it. So I was looking at it. It's a few pages, but it talks about, goals, talking to Laura over other things, make sure we list comp plan, what other elements are we supporting as far as policies, but nonetheless, we're working on it. And we as staff like the idea too. So that's all. Nice
job, Steve. I like the look of that.
And I just want to say, we're all on the same page in this, and this is, something that we've been talking about for a while, and how we, there are projects that we don't charge staff time to, but we still need to be able to describe how much that's costing outside staff time, even if it's not part of the actual project cost. Because every city does it slightly differently. And my preference has always been to have it as part of the grant cost and bill it to the grants. But there are definitely situations where that's not the best thing to do either.
Thank you, Mayor. Anything else for the good of the order? Councilmember Hoag.
So thank you, Councilmember Naplin and Councilmember Langle, because for bringing up 275th. I was wondering if Steve can elaborate on a little bit more on, we got an email that it was paused, and could you elaborate more on the project, what's been done so far, and what you see going forward?
Steve, did you hear that?
Yeah, I was trying to remember to lower my hand from last time, unmute myself, and then start my camera. a lot of processes here now. So yes, after we had some lovely discussions yesterday with council and staff, went back to the file and we were looking things over and determined the project, whatever I wrote in there, project approval form hadn't been finished. So we had the notice application, took the public comment timeline, and then it appears with the COVID situation and staff not being in office and some of us using physical paper still, we missed some process time. So we picked everything up today, polished everything up, get it into planning by the end of the week, and then we can formalize and close the door on issuing our project approval. So not a huge deal. We pulled off site just to make sure nothing's crossed up as far as, you know, moving forward. I know there's a lot of angst over what we have done and how much I have allowed additional over the 30 feet. So I wasn't expecting to talk too much about that, but rest assured we're trying to figure out, the plans call for some tree removal. As I understand it's not city property, and I've had conversations with plenty of people understanding there's plenty of other things in town to do. We don't need to make more work for ourselves. I can appreciate that tenor, but again, it's, we don't get a lot of opportunities to do projects, and we want to do the best we can. And that starts with, the staff you see on these meetings and the ones that are doing all the work in town. So we're moving forward, communicating, and we have to please everybody. I have people who want all the trees down, and we have people who want none of the trees down. And, it's all over the board. Hopefully you folks know we're hoping to please as many as we can. We know we won't please everybody, but we're trying to leave a great project for the city to the best of our abilities. So.
Thank you, Steve. I know you're working hard to save some of the more significant trees. I know there was a maple there in particular that family wanted to keep. And I thoroughly trying to get rid of blackberries. I think I've spent most of my life trying to get rid of blackberries someplace in the world, but maybe we can amend some of our planting to help assure there's some privacy for those homeowners that have lost some of that buffer there. Other comments from City Council? I don't see any other hands up. I just briefly wanted to share one myself. I wanted to recognize Chief Hurt, our police chief. He and Director Thomas stepped up to be our interim city administrators, and Chief Hurt is going back full-time April 1st to his police chief job. But I didn't want it to go by without just simply stopping and recognizing the quality of work that he's done, the relationships that he has really built, a really top relationship with employees. He's taken on huge projects for us as a city in that role, some very challenging items. And I think he's just done a stellar job. So Chief, thank you for your work. Thank you for your dedication. We're thankful you're our police chief, thankful for the time that you put in as our interim city administrator. Laura's continuing in that through June. It's kind of on our shoulders here as a city council, working with the mayor and seeing when we're able to get a city administrator in place. I think we all realize how valuable that is. But thank you, Chief.
And thank you all for the opportunity.
Well, we can move on to our first topic. Our first topic is COVID budget impacts. This was requested by City Council at our last meeting. The real purpose for this is to discuss our budget in light of COVID-19, in particularly the impacts on both our revenues and increased expenditures related to COVID-19. What this isn't about tonight, because we have such a short time, is to solve it. This will be an ongoing thing. We have had some requests to make this a special meeting, which we may do here in the near future. Tonight, I wanted to give opportunity for some of staff and make sure that we understand where we're at today. Our next topic that we'll be looking at the cow here is hearing from Dana and taking a look at some of the adjustments to our budget. So I think they dovetail together. The city continually monitors our budget. We certainly have had increased expenses. One of the things that I've tried to do is go back to our city council work plan priorities, and I'll send out an update, but I added to it our COVID-19 response recovery, employee safety, maintain critical services, purchase additional safety equipment and supplies, work from home logistical equipment, protective screening. I think there was a council member who had brought up having some screening at City Hall at the front office when it opens, and certainly disinfectant and PPE, personal protective equipment, and then potentially monitoring that may take place after we open City Hall. So we've added that to our draft work plan, and I'll send that out so we can look at having council update that and approve it. It's a big topic. There certainly are additional costs. Mayor, could I ask you, if you don't mind sharing for a moment? I know that we were looking at some reimbursement from the governor, and I think the county potentially weighing in, and I understand there's potentially other reimbursement from FEMA. Could I have you talk just a moment about that, what it looks like?
Absolutely. So I sent an email out to council as a whole last week. Late, I believe it was last Tuesday, we received word through Kathy Lambert's office before it was public that the governor had decided to distribute CARES Act funding that the state received on a per capita basis to the cities and jurisdictions that didn't directly qualify. What this means for us is that the city is eligible to use up to $235,200 in directly related COVID expenses. We cannot supplant things that are existing in our budget. It's all about the things that we didn't plan for. So your hand sanitizer, Mayor Pro Tem Remington's point, your, you know, any of the computers and what have you that we've needed to change the course of business. We don't have final guidelines yet on how we're going to be allowed to use that money. As of late last week, OFM was still working with the U.S. Department of Treasury to sort that out. We had a meeting with our Snoqualmie Valley mayors and legislators this morning, and there's a lot of unknowns on everyone's side that we're trying to get answers to. They are expecting to begin getting the contracts out to cities on the 13th of May. And then we have till the end of the year to use the money. What's not 100% clear yet is if this will be reimbursement basis or a lump sum check that we have to keep in a separate account and use funds out of and then return at the end. But there's definitely a lot of documentation that will go along with that. In addition, Sean Tozer will likely expand on it a little later. We're likely to also receive some level of FEMA funding. And so the tangled web is going to be sorting out between what's more appropriate resource to be spent from the CARES Act funding versus the limitations of the FEMA funding. Right now, I can't remember the exact number, but I believe as of last week, with the known things that we need to do between now and the end of the year, I believe our expenses were approximately $140,000 if we don't have to go to a full closure again. Those are in that range. That said, knowing that we are getting this funding means that we can expand sort of what we are planning to do. We already have some easily, quickly put together, well done plexiglass screens in our front-facing buildings, but the reality is we need the whole area screened off. Depending on the employees, we might need to purchase screens, vinyl screens for offices as well. So there's things like that that we will be able to use those expenses for. In addition, Councilmember Kathy Lambert called me last week, and since council members aren't doing as much traveling and what have you, they're looking at their own budgets, and her decision is to redistribute some of that money to us. In my conversation with her last week, and the dollar amount she gave is $5,000. My discussion with her last week is that since we are getting the CARES Act funding, my preference would be to put that back into the human services grant funding process and continue to assist human service agencies, but we'll have a group discussion once that actually comes in. The other thing with the CARES Act funding that's unique, and there still are some kinks to get ironed out on exactly how you do it, but there's been some Attorney General guidance on it, is that we might be able to grant out some of that funding if we're not going to use it all for city operating expenses and COVID related. And we might be able to provide additional assistance through Human Services grant funding for utility and rent, and potentially some options to assist some of our small businesses. So I'm thrilled that not only did we get the money, but it's a much bigger sum than we expected, and I think a lot of cities expected. When people ask why I'm on conference calls with the governor's office and the White House and our Congress people, et cetera, this is exactly why. Because it took the mayors from across the state to work with the governor's office to get this money to the cities. And so it seems like sometimes the efforts are futile. In times like this, it's a really cost-effective way actually for us to obtain additional funding for the city. Beyond that, Mr. Tozer, did you have anything to add to that? And then Ms. Mason might have something to add as well.
Yeah, I have a little section in the council meeting.
Okay.
But to your point on CARES, there's a lot of guidance coming out. I've been reading through one of the documents that came out today, Q&A, 7-page Q&A that covers a lot of this. And then tomorrow in the countywide emergency management call, they're going to do a whole section on CARES specific stuff. So yeah, more details to come, but nailed it.
And Ms. Mason, did you have more to add? I know my first number probably wasn't completely right. Unless I'm looking at the spreadsheet, those things pass quickly.
No, I did put together, I don't know if we have enough time, just a real brief PowerPoint about the revenue impacts, just to facilitate conversation. So if everyone wants to look at it, we can take a peek. Okay.
Great. Jody. Oh, there we go.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so the major revenue impacts to the general fund, of course, property tax, which is 28% of budgeted general fund revenues, is mostly going to be a deferral. So the county allowed property tax payers who pay themselves to pay later in May instead of in April. And King County was thrilled to find out that a lot of people, they received more tax revenue than they anticipated. So a lot of people are still paying theirs on time, a few of our staff members included. So, and then utility tax is 22% of general fund revenues. And we are starting to see kind of a lag in payments, but we do anticipate that, there is going to be a deferral and then there'll be a slight decrease, but then that should flatten out in the long run. Sales tax is 18% of budgeted general fund revenues. And the major categories that are going to be impacted are retail, construction, and accommodation and food services. But we won't see the major impacts until next month and the month after. So we'll see April in June and May and July. So, and March this month. So we'll know a little bit more about that soon. Licensing and permitting is about 8% of budgeted general fund revenues, and the impact in the short term, because we have about 160 permits in-house right now. We just got a few more in. It's probably going to be pretty flat, and then we'll just have to look at the long-term impacts depending on what the housing situation is like. If there's still a shortage of housing, we'll probably still have development. Revenue impacts in the street fund is property tax as well, so deferred. And then we should see a decrease in the state shared revenues for motor vehicle and multimodal tax. That's about 21% of street fund revenues. So it's a decrease in the short term, and then it's probably going to flatten out at a lower rate as people continue to telecommute and not drive into work. And then Big Rock Ballpark activity fees are 68% of the Big Rock Ballpark fund revenues. Impact in the short term, a decrease over the next few months through the summer. And then the long term, they should flatten out at the regular rate. So nothing too long term there. REIT 1 and 2 funds, impact in the short term, it's probably going to remain flat. We just received what we will be receiving, the amount that we will be receiving in April. And let me see if I can move this so I can see what the numbers were. So in April in 2019, we received in May, the city received $57,000 in REIT 1 and 2 combined. For April 2020, we're going to receive $47,200 for that will be received in May. So it's off over last year, but it's the average per month is about $46,000 for the 2 different REITs. So that's not too bad. Houses we're still selling. And then property tax, street and park CIP funds, that's going to probably flatten out because of all the permits that we have in-house right now. And then long term, it's just dependent on development. So we'll have to look at that. And then park levy funds, there's most likely not going to be any impact. So possibly be deferred because the county may be getting the money in a little bit later and may give it to us later, but we should see all of that money. And then the water, sewer, storm drainage operating funds, the impact charges for services, we're already seeing that they're slightly delayed. So we may get some of that money a little bit later than anticipated, but we should still get it. And then in the water, sewer, storm drainage CIP funds, the general facility charges, that just depends on development. And like I said, we have 160 permits in-house right now. So we should see revenues for those upcoming. And then we just have a couple new revenues that aren't part of the budget impacts that are coming up or the budget amendments, but I just wanted to mention them. We have the Transportation Benefit District that started adding 0.2% sales tax starting April 1st. So we'll start receiving that in June, and we need to probably prioritize the use for that. And then the CARES Act funding that the mayor was discussing. And then we also will get about $9,000 per year that the city can use towards housing assistance. And then I just wanted to, I'm sure all of you studied the March financial report in great detail. And the general fund revenues, 60% of budget was received. The bulk of the property tax, so we're at 62.5% of the biennium has gone by, but the bulk of property tax is received in April and May, and we're still at 60%. So that's pretty good for the general fund. And then of course, interest revenue was higher than anticipated in 2019 and at the start of 2020, because we had some bonds that were called because interest rates were coming down. So they call the bonds because it's less expensive for them to buy them than to pay us the interest, or to call them than to pay us the interest. So we got that interest when they were called. And then general fund expenditures are about 58% of the biennium. And this is before budget amendments. So this is the budget as it stands right now. And then for all funds, 60%, 63% of revenue has been received, and 55% of expenditures have been spent. And that's it, my last slide.
Great.
And so to add on to that, before we get into budget amendments, if I may, Mayor Pro Tem, is that all right?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Okay. So obviously, our budget amendments, which are known at the end of March, we're already making changes kind of as a result of the potential major changes in economic situation. It still remains to be seen how major it will be for us versus it will be for other jurisdictions that don't have as many high-tech workers living in their cities. We're obviously keeping a real close eye on the March and April and state taxes and state shared revenues. Those will be seen really between, at the end of May, beginning in June. And I think that the numbers that we receive in May will start to give us a clearer picture of what we're going to see overall. The good news is, I think on the chamber call, we have been hearing from businesses that are actually doing quite well right now, way better than they expected. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the types that most of the businesses that we have that bring in significant revenue will be able to make it through this downturn when things start picking up again. In the meantime, you know, this is something that cities do on a regular basis. We are filling the vacant, we're holding off on filling non-seasonal vacant positions. So since we don't know when building's going to open up, Ms. Thomas has advertised her planner position, but we're not interviewing or moving that forward until we get into June, unless the governor opens up construction early. If the governor opens up construction early, we will most likely need to bring that person on board no matter what, but that also does come with revenue coming into the city. Of course, you know, nobody's doing any non-essential traveler training right now. We're not doing any non-essential overtime except for water meter installations. So most of the overtime that you should see is a result of illnesses in departments, or like, for example, if a few people go out sick in the police department, you end up with officers doing overtime. That's just standard operating. And then, of course, any overtime that's required for COVID-related expenses will be reimbursable if we do that. So again, I just said if we need to, if the governor reopens construction, which I expect that will be happening within the next few weeks, we will need to begin moving forward to fill the admin permit position in the community development department in order to be able to keep up with our statutory obligations. So, and this is, you know, this is part of what we're just continuously looking at internally, looking at where we can save even in a normal year, and what we need to do and what we can do without for a while. So with that, that's all I had to say on the rest of the COVID side.
Well, thank you, Mayor, Director Mason as well. I think that gives us a good foundation. One of the things that directors were asked, as well as council, is areas within our own budgets that could be cut. A week or so ago, I did ask council members about what we might cut from our own budget. And here's a list of items. I haven't sent that to Director Mason yet, but I will. Some were more specific about amounts. Others just said we ought to consider it. And those included travel training, which we obviously don't use very much. Room rental was a big one supported by council, the potential to move it from Riverview School District to one of our own facilities. There were questions about elections, voter registration fees. Those are both pretty high and things that cities normally do. I don't know if we have anyone up for election this year, and since it's the last year of the budget, whether we can save there. There were some supplies, and certainly I think the Planning Commission is part of ours as well, so we need to be cognizant of what they need to spend and what their needs are. The key to this, and I think the point council made at our last meeting, is do we need to start looking holistically at our budget and start considering reductions in expenses? It makes me feel a lot better to just know the city is monitoring, that directors are pinpointing things where they can save. Council had mentioned several examples of things that they thought we could reduce. The key message that I hear is that it's being monitored. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the closure, whether the governor's going to open things up sooner or later, what those impacts are. And so as we get more information, in fact, I think June 1st is when we're likely going to get our next update in less than a month. And that'll give us an opportunity to say, how are things progressing? Do we need a special meeting so that we can get together and start reconsidering budget? Two of our council members have input, Councilmember Langle and then Councilmember Naplin.
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about in the Finance Administration Committee with Dana and the mayor and Laura and Steve is, you know, we're just not in a predictable normal time. We all know that. And so we're going to need to be much more nimble and incremental And we're going to have to do more scenario planning. And that really needs to be a collaboration. I think finance and administration is a good place for some of that, because we've spent a lot of time in the last year to understand the basis for the 2019-2020 budget. And the beauty of doing this now, to think about it as the glass half full, is the more we deep dive into this right now, the better prepared we're going to be for analyzing 21-22 and setting that budget. Now, I'm not speaking for the committee. This is something that I've been thinking. We know there is coming before us a significant additional request to use a beginning fund balance. And I think a conversation that is worthwhile, and it can either be at finance and administration or some other way, special meeting, is that we really need to, because this is an unpredictable time, we really need to be thinking a little bit in the scenario category of financial planning to see if you know, very high possibility this virus is going to challenge us for a while. And so if we look at it from that perspective, coming to grip, not that we would automatically do this, but start to thinking as a council about how we would use our beginning fund balance incrementally, because I firmly believe that if we can just get into 2023, and yes, it might be tightening a bit of the belt now, but if we can get into 2023, I think we'll be okay for all the reasons the mayor has already identified. Tech community, not super dependent on commercial property taxes or retail. So I'm making my pitch for some financial planning as we move forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Naplin.
I just want to say that's great, Dorothy. I agree with you on all those points. I had another question that when I saw the presentation about how our water usage is. I don't know if we have any information from March of actual usage in March. There was a friend was speculating about her household that, you know, people wearing pajamas, kids not showering every day. Are we using less water? Are we using more water? Just kind of curious what's that looking like?
I don't have those numbers for you, but I will get them and have them for you by next week for the finance committee meeting. And then I can share them with the rest of the council
Great.
as well.
Thank you.
Well, I've been adding a little water to my scotch, so if that helps, I've been using a little bit more lately. I'm teasing, I add ice. But are there other questions from council members? You know, still, obviously tonight, we don't have the time to go in through the budget, and we're going to be hearing about the budget in just a moment. But I don't want you to think that that's not on our plate. This may be something that we want to have a special meeting so that we can really do a deeper dive and take a look at the budget. I do think we have a little time here, keeping in mind what Councilmember Langle said, the sooner we do planning, the better. So we don't want to just put this off and wait till we go, uh-oh, we're at a cliff. But I do think we have a little time to see what the governor's going to do, a little time to do some more data on what's actually coming in, especially since the virus has had an impact on the city of Duval over the last few months. Now we're going to start to see specific revenue changes. That'll allow us to get into some of these more specific questions and looking at budget items. I really appreciate directors are already taking a look to try to come up with their list and see what we can postpone, delay, or even remove from the budget and hold off till the next cycle. Let's see, I show Councilmember Hoag and then Mayor Okerlander. Councilmember Hoag, go ahead.
Oh, I appreciate, Mayor, that you were coming forward with thoughts of like putting a pause in hiring and non-essential overtime, because those are things that we've been talking about, you know, within the finance meetings. I also feel like it would be really nice, and I feel like this is something that, you know, we need more time to do this, but I think that I truly feel that projects that we approved prior to this virus, right now we probably, there might be things we don't want to do. For instance, do we really want to put exercise stations on 275th? Is that that to me, I don't know if that would be a priority after this virus, right? Do we want to put more money into that project, or do we want to make sure that we stay to the $200,000? And these are things that the council needs to talk about with each project that we've approved. And I was kind of hoping we would have more information about that at this meeting, but I just feel that just because we've approved something prior to the virus doesn't mean we feel the same way today. And I think it's going to take time to go through this. And I also feel we need to look at professional services, because there have been some contracts that have been signed for things like a facilitator. Do we still need that? We can't do it now because we're doing meetings on Zoom and he wants face-to-face meetings. So is that something that, you know, that was like $25,000 or up to that. So to me, there's things like that that we need to be looking at. Besides, I mean, we've looked at our budget. I'm wondering if there's more things that can be done within the administrative side as well. So, and Public Works.
Steve can answer, do a little more answering on the exercise equipment, but correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but that's not a guarantee. That's one of the items that's being put in the bid. So there are options. And with the sidewalk project, I do want to remind folks that that $200,000 the city's already received. And so the council already received that money. And if we stay within that $200,000, other than staff time, it's not costing the city anything. But there might be other options that come along. So Steve, do you want to address that real quick, and then I'll address the rest.
Sure. So it is, yeah, 200 grand is in the pocket. We've spent some obviously on engineering. I'm holding out for really any decisions on the alternates, as we put alternates for the crosswalk, the lighting, as well as the activity station. Also the activity station can be put in by staff down the road. So maybe everything happens for a reason and everything comes in under budget. I don't know. We can talk about what it means then at that time. So did I answer the question enough?
On the point of, let's see if I've just lost it here for a second. It has been a long day. I apologize. As far as
services, is that the one you're thinking of?
No, honestly, I'm not as concerned about that as I am other things, but this is what now I've got it. So when we look at looking at impacts to projects and what have you, and the long-term financial planning for recovery from this process, the first step we have to get to is having our departments done with their recovery plans. Because, for example, the police chief has put together a pretty extensive plan on what to do, and you can get some baseline estimates from those plans of what your increased cost might be should certain scenarios happen. I think everybody's probably seen the news that they're expecting potentially a second wave and a much larger wave in the fall of this virus as it coincides with the flu. And then you have states that are opening up against public health advice. We have a local mayor who's done that with his city against the governor's orders. And what we don't know yet is if that will increase infections and force tighter closures, just at the point where we're starting to make progress. But when we get those items done, we're really, because of this situation, we're a couple months behind internally in starting on the budget process. But a lot of that planning will no doubt be done during that process as we start to look at what does the future look like? Do we have, once things start to stabilize a little bit, as far as it'll probably take a couple of months to really see if the slow reopening or the fast reopening in other jurisdictions really has that rapid effect of massive new infections and what it does. I've been really struggling with folks saying just open up the economy. Well, that if you do that, thousands more people die. And but yet at the same time, our small businesses can operate and operate safely if they are allowed to. So, you know, this is the hardest part about this situation, is so many unknowns. But we are discussing them every day, and we'll be getting all of that stuff together. It's probably just not going to be as fast as folks want, but we will definitely be working on that and bringing that forward for folks for discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. We've got a couple other hands up, Councilmember Langle and Chief Hurt. I did want to share I think last night I looked at the numbers we have for COVID-19 infections in Duval. It's actually our 98019 zip code, so it's much more than the city. But there's 15 known cases and sadly 1 fatality. So percent-wise, compared to most areas, we're very low. I think we're fortunate partly because we're rural. I think a lot of people are adhering to the stay home, stay safe as well. Councilmember Langle.
I have a question for Steve, because this has never been clear to me, and I'm hoping he can give me a real quick answer. If the 275th Street project, if the base project comes in over the 200,000, what funding source would we need to use to complete the baseline project? What would your recommendation be?
Well, we'll have to check the funds, but all the REAP funds, it's a capital projects on the list. So REAP 304, REAP 305, Streets 307, as well as Parks 308, because it's in our PTLS plan as well as a pathway, trailway, and amenity. So we have options. Right now, there aren't a lot of other things spoken for, but we haven't done any master planning for long-term capital replacement of buildings and other programs. So the money isn't portioned out, but there are resources available.
Okay, and thank you very much. And then my second question really goes to professional services. And one of the things that is something that I distinguish within professional services are things that we have to do. Like we have to do certain things under the requirements of our union contract. And there's professional services associated with that. And fortunately, we were able to enter into a contract that was more financially favorable, which is a great choice. But to me, there's a very different category for those type of professional services. It was also discussed that we might need more legal to interact with the union negotiation. I don't quite understand how that amount of money is why that additional is needed versus what was originally budgeted. But my point really just remains, there are things that we have to do under professional services, and there's things that we can wait and look at again in 21, 22. And to me, one of the obvious ones is the facility study. And we don't even know, right? I mean, fortunately, the virtual working is doing fine, but we don't even know, where we're going to be for facilities right now. So to me, that's an example of something that could be deferred into 21, 22, looked at again, versus something very critical like the union negotiations. There's a big difference in those two things.
Well, thank you. Chief Hurt, you have your hand up on here. And then Councilmember Hogue, it looks like you have input as well.
Thank you, Mayor Remington. Chief Hurt. I wanted to touch a little bit on facilities and give you guys a snapshot of what's going on with the police department. As you all know, that was a 10-year facility. We're going on 16 years. We have struggled for the last 3 to 4 weeks with our HVAC system. Specifically, officers coming to work, spending time in the facility. There's something going on in the air that's causing them to sneeze and cough. They go outside and it clears up. We had both our public works supervisor and superintendent come in and assess it. They experienced the same symptoms. We brought in heat transfer 2 weeks ago. They came in, they changed all the filters. But as recently as last Friday, it has come back. So I don't know what that looks like yet. We're waiting for heat transfer to come back this week and reevaluate it. I've asked heat transfer additionally to quote a new HVAC system. I have not received that quote, but I wanted you to be aware that that's coming forward. I don't know what else to do at this point. I just wanted you to be aware of that, and that is an expense, and it's probably going to be a large one. Thank you.
Keith, thank you. Councilmember Hoag, did you have your hand up? And then I think Councilmember Napland had input. No? Okay, Councilmember Napland?
Hi, I just wanted to say, to follow up on Mayor Okerlander's sharing some of the, I don't know if you want to call them, a little bit of pauses on hiring, you know, making sure we're watching overtime, you know, trying to use it for essential. And our finance committee had discussed those ideas as well. And I think we were hoping as a finance committee that some of those ideas would be formalized and there would be a disciplined approach to evaluating before those kind of restrictions were removed. And one of those would be, let's look at second quarter reports, because then we would see some of the revenue effects, because there's always a delay of receiving revenue and when it was earned. And so I would like those ideas formalized. I don't know if the mayor wants to write some out and council can take a look at it. But I really would like a disciplined approach to making a decision of when those can be raised. I feel like it's a professional way of handling it and just making sure there's transparency and understanding if any of those things change. So I don't know, Mayor Okerlander, your thoughts on that?
I'm fine with sending out a memo. And you know, the reality is we're not doing non-essential overtime as it is. So that just, you know, sending out a memo just formalizes it and puts it in writing. So I'm more than happy to do that and get that out to council by the end of the week.
So when I say formalize, I think it would be that, I don't know if in your memo, there would be an absolute assurance that before anything changes that you outlined in the memo, that council would review reports and there would be a discussion before any of those would be removed. Because a memo is really, you know, it's a memo, it's great, but it's not a formal decision and a disciplined approach of
yeah, I think in general, the only thing that I could see that might not, well, no, I think everything would be able to have time to come to council. So when I think about it, I was thinking about the permit and planner position, but that, you know, has recently been posted, but we're not doing interviews until at least June. So we will have plenty of time to come and talk to about that. And so I'm happy to put that in there, but I would also put a caveat that if there's an emergency that comes up, I'm gonna call and say we have to pull this back. But in that sense, it would really be essential if we're needing to do it at that point anyways. So, but I'm happy to do that. That's not a big deal.
Okay, I just think sometimes there's a difference in our opinion of what's essential and, you know, the scenario. So I just wanted to make sure there was a real disciplined approach to reviewing second quarter reports.
For me, what defines essential is what the city is required to do by law. So what's essential to do by law is our police services, making sure our water's flowing, making sure the sewer's going. Those types of things, to me, is what I define as essential services of the city.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot more work to do. This could be a topic as well that the Finance Administration looks at a list items and then bring it to the full council. It certainly could be a main topic for an entire COW. Councilmember Hoag has really helped us try to focus in on this and not lose sight of it here, so I appreciate that. Tonight was just a snippet to get an update, be able to talk about some framework. Certainly the staff is already working on it. I think, yeah, we do have a couple other folks with their hands up. We're eating into Director Mason's time to go over. I don't want to go too much longer on this topic unless council wants to, and then we can move her topic to the council meeting. Director Thomas, you want to take the floor here for a moment?
It will be super short as well. And just to keep, the era of transparency open, the one area that we will have overtime occurring is with our permit specialist position and our plan review position. We're trying to really minimize it, but we have 120 days to review a building permit. And so we're doing our best to stay on top of that. So I just wanted to make that statement. Thank you.
Director Mason, how are we doing? I show that it's 6:37 and we have council at 7. Do you have time for your presentation, or would you prefer we bump that to city council?
It's really up to you. I think most people have seen at least some version of the PowerPoint. It's been changed up a little bit, but so it's a little more big picture than way down into the details. So I think I could power through it, but it's up to you.
Well, I apologize. Let's go ahead and begin. And
Okay.
if we need to bump part of it, Mayor, are you okay with that? We'll just see where this goes.
Absolutely. If we can't get through it, and I know that everyone's been briefed, the changes you see you're probably going to like. So if we need to add it more for discussion in the council meeting, we can certainly do that.
Okay. Well, we'll take a look at 6:55 and see where we're at and see whether council wants to move it to the council meeting or end it there. Well, Director Mason, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, this one. All right, so it's changed up a little bit since the last presentation for a lot of you. So as the mayor mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty about how COVID-19 virus will impact Duval economically. So we're going to revisit again in June and determine if additional amendments are needed. So, and the mayor already told you until then, the city will put a hold on hiring for permanent positions with the exception of possibly the permanent planner, one-time expenditures in the general street and Big Rock Park funds, and then non-essential travel and training, and keep overtime to a minimum. So the 5 different areas, well, first we'll talk about the change to fund balance, then changes to operating and special revenue funds, changes to capital improvement funds, the changes to the debt service funds, and then changes to the internal service funds. So here's the overall picture. We're changes to revenues for all funds together is an additional $517,000 in revenue, and then an additional $728,000 in expenditure with and that what that does is it increases fund balance for all funds about $210,000 overall. The next few slides will show you kind of what the big picture is. So some of the changes, I've got to move this around so I can see. So some of the changes impact both revenues and expenditures equally, so they offset each other. So there's transfers in and out of funds, or revenue and an expenditure, about $343,000. There's grant revenue and related expenditures, $326,000. There's, I think I've discussed this with all of you, the Seattle Public Utility revenue and fees aren't really the city's, so we're moving that to a custodial fund. And then there's the loan proceeds and the payment for the city's dump truck that just needed to be recognized. Major changes to revenue explained is there's a community development block grant revenue that we received in 2019, which was mainly from 2018 expenditures, so that wasn't budgeted. We're increasing building and planning fees by about $330,000, and that is based on 67 of the 160 permits being finished and picked up and paid for. So most likely this number will grow. And then that's the same for the increase in water, sewer, storm drainage, general facility charges, all based on just the 67 permits being picked up. Decreases in revenue is the sale of property. We're taking that out of the general fund. Street impact fees, which are decreasing due to developer contributions, and then one developer paying a 2008, he was grandfathered into a 2017 rate. And then we're reducing water charges by about $250,000 to meet 2019 revenues, so to match that revenue. Major changes in expenditures are increases for professional services that are billable. So we will receive the revenue back on a lot of that. And then professional services are also increasing. And part of that is, you can see a big decrease is about $892,000 in salary and benefits. So we took 2019, which we actually had, and what we expected in 2020, and then we were able to reduce it by this amount. Part of the reason for the decrease is because in 2019 there were unfilled positions, so we had to use professional services to make up for those. Here's the city's 6 operating funds and special revenue funds. This is how the city pays for, or revenues and expenditures are reported for day-to-day activities. So changes to the budgeted general fund balance, it's decreasing by $142,000. You can see the major changes is in tax revenue, which is bringing down tax revenue levels to 2020 tax revenue levels down to 2019 levels. The sale of fixed assets, the property, which we discussed, and then development related revenue. And then the expenditure adjustments, major changes are the salary and benefits, which are decreasing by $426,000. Professional services, there's the increase in legal services, which Councilmember Langle mentioned. It's $60,000 to bring legal services up to 2019 levels, and then an additional $30,000 for Teamster negotiations. And then we're able to bring indigent legal defense down by $45,000. There's a $40,000 increase for emergency response to the COVID outbreak. And then the human services grants that council passed, I believe 2 meetings ago, but maybe it was just 1. Changes to the street fund reduces the budgeted fund balance by $43,000. Major adjustments are a transportation improvement board grant, and then a retransfer in for $14,000 for the Batten Hill overlay project. We've got the motor vehicle excise tax, a reduction of $36,000. And then you can also see a Batten Road reconstruction project expenditure increase. We're able to reduce benefits by $18,000. There were some unbudgeted utilities, and then there's a $10,000 increase for illumination at busy intersections. And someone yell if I'm going too fast, because please. Changes to Big Rock Ballpark, $64,000 decrease to the budgeted fund balance. Revenue is decreasing by about $30,500. $57,000 is for activity fees that aren't going to be received in the spring and the summer. Got a REIT transfer in and a WCI skate park grant, which is paying for the expenditure over here on the other side for the skate park fence. And then we have a slight increase to salary and benefits that's $8,500. Changes to the water fund is a decrease of $238,000 to the budgeted fund balance. And the major changes is the decrease in water charges that we already discussed, just bringing them down to 2019 levels. And then the moving of the Seattle Public Utilities general facility charge to a custodial fund. You can also see that the expenditure side of that. And then there's an additional $115,000 for water meter replacements and a decrease in salary and benefits, truing those up for 2020. Changes to the sewer fund is an increase in the budgeted fund balance of $293,000. Revenue is a transfer in from the bond redemption and reserve funds. The city does not need the money that was left in those funds, so we're transferring back to the original funds that the money came from. And then there's an increase in cost for Batten Road sewer installation, and then a big decrease in salary and benefits, and then a $52,000 increase in the contract for biosolids handling. Storm drainage fund, an increase in ending fund balance of $29,500, which includes a grant from the Department of Ecology, and then a decrease in salary and benefits, and an increase in professional services. And then here's all the city's capital improvement funds. All the revenue that comes into these funds is restricted mostly for capital improvements. So the REIT funds 1 and 2, there's an increase of $21,000 for interest revenue, which has almost all been received. And then the major expenditure adjustment is the REIT transfers out to the Big Rock and Street Operating Fund for Batten Hill overlay, and then retainage from 2018 that wasn't budgeted. The Street Capital Improvement Fund has a $555,000 decrease in budgeted revenue, or in budgeted ending fund balance. And the big part of that is the street impact fees, which we talked about already. Therefore, developer contributions or developer improvements that were made, and then also a grandfathered in fee reduction. And then there's the community development block grant revenue that came from 2018. And you can see there was just a little of that expense over here on the expenditure side for the ADA ramps. Parks Capital Improvement Fund, just a revenue adjustment for the park levy fund money for both 2019 and 20. It wasn't budgeted. And then for a $35,000 King County Youth Sports grant that the city received. Water capital improvement, also an increase in fund balance. Major changes are transfers in from the bond redemption and reserve, just returning that money back to the fund that put the money in. And then an increase in water general facility charges based on the 67 permits that the city anticipates being picked up. There will probably be a lot more because there's 160 sitting on Laura's desk or somewhere at City Hall. And then there's just an adjustment to the water comp plan for the contract for the water comp plan. Sewer Capital Improvement Fund, also an increase in budgeted ending fund balance. Sewer equalization charges have already been received, and we don't anticipate receiving any more in 2020. And then the general facility charges, an increase due to anticipated permits being picked up. A storm drainage capital improvement fund, also an increase of almost $85,000. Revenue is from general facility charges for permits that are anticipated being picked up. And then just a small expenditure adjustment for some Department of Revenue tax that was not budgeted. And then the changes to debt service fund, just a transfer in for debt issuance fees, and then a payment for the local program interest and principal for the city's dump truck loan. And then the bond redemption and reserve funds, these transfers or these changes will zero out those funds, just moving the money back into the water CIP and the sewer operating fund. And then I'm going really fast. Changes to internal service funds. So internal service funds are funded by charges from services to all the other funds. The vehicle equipment fund, increase in fund budgeted fund balance of $32,000 with a revenue adjustment to show the local program loan proceeds, and then a sale of a surplus vehicle. And then a change to expenditure adjustments is just to show the dump truck purchase. A part of it was not budgeted. And then to show that transfer to the debt service fund for the issuance costs. To the information technology fund, a $9,600 decrease in budgeted ending fund balance, just a revenue adjustment, adding some interest revenue. And then the expenditure for adjustment is to pay for the phone system that was put in 2018. It was just a payment that was missed. And then an increase for the annual maintenance for Springbrook software, the city's financial software. Building maintenance fund, overall decrease of $90,000, $90,500 to ending fund balance. The city's receiving revenue from a full culture grant for the Doherty House roof. And then you can see over on the expenditure side, the cost of the roof. And then we're also taking the capital maintenance out of restricted fund balance and moving it to an expenditure line item. So that was a lot to talk about in that short amount of time. But as you can see, the beginning fund balance at the beginning of the biennium was almost $16.5 million. The amended ending fund balance is still going to be much higher, about $18 million. And there's that $210,000 variance between the budgeted ending fund balance and the amended ending fund balance. Does everyone have that memorized?
All I can say is, wow. Thank you. It's 6:53, so you finished early. I just apologize for making that a little more rushed.
No, that's okay.
There's so much amazing work that's been done here, and I want to thank you for, one, joining us as a member of our city staff and providing such helpful information. Out of respect for council, I'd like to hold any questions off till we get to city council so we can all take a few-minute break. Could I just see folks put up their hands if they have questions for Dana? And if there are none, we can end it here. If you do have questions, we'll ask the mayor if we can move that to city council. So how many have questions or input they'd like on the presentation here? Boy, I'm not seeing anything. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there.
Thank you. Councilmember Iyer, Councilmember Hoag. So Mayor, I would just request that we add this to our city council agenda at the appropriate place. And Dana, if you can hang in with us through city council, we'll get a chance to discuss the presentation a bit.
Absolutely. I just really want to say thank you to the finance committee because they really asked some tough questions, and we had to go back and look at things. And so, and I really appreciate them all.
Well, thank you.
Right.
Councilmember Hoag, you had your hand up. Are you, quick question?
I'd like to see if we can add a discussion about 275th on to new business or unfinished business, wherever it would go.
I think there were several folks that appreciated that. Are there others in council that would like to go ahead and add that? I mean, we can request it at council. I see some heads nodding. And Mayor, could we also add that as well?
We can if Steve's up for it. I just want to remind council of your own rules, which is no surprises rules, to bring new items to the agenda without going through your process. You're welcome to not go through that process, but you know, I know that the Public Works Director is working on a lot of those items right now. So I wonder if it would be best if you submitted your final questions on it so that they could be prepared to do a presentation at the next meeting.
Councilmember Hoag, you're okay with that?
I would be okay if other council members are. I just, will there be any work done at that project prior to the next meeting? Because I was hoping that we could have a discussion before any more work.
Are we losing our meeting? Judy, are we losing our meeting here? It looks
Steve,
like.
do you want to answer?
Okay, here we go.
Will the project be paused at least for 2 weeks then? So we can talk about it at the next meeting?
Certainly likely. I mean, I'm not sure what kind of discussion you all want to have. I'm more than happy to have some kind of discussion, maybe without resolution, but we could certainly, it's up to you folks. Appreciate the mayor's tenor on trying to make sure we know what we're looking at, but I'm not prepared for anything other than discussion and what I know. So you've got that.
So Councilmember Lango.
As a compromise, or as I say, incremental step, we could continue this discussion. I think Dana has scheduled us for a more frequent finance and administration meeting, which will occur before the next council meeting. We could continue the discussion there, still have it on the next council agenda, but then if all the questions get answered, perhaps it can be removed. That might be a way to keep the discussion going and have a more final report at the next council meeting.
Thank you for that suggestion. Councilmember Hoag, you were nodding your head.
No, I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that it's not, trees aren't going to be cut down between now and 2 weeks from now is all.
It doesn't look like they will be. So, well, I think this is a good time to end it. If everyone's okay, Finance Administration will add that. They'll be discussing it. It sounds like the trees will be held off being cut down until that discussion takes place, and we can put it on our next council meeting as well. And that would help follow, as the mayor suggested, a little more of our rules and allow folks to be prepared. Councilmember Naplin, are you okay with that as well? Yes, I see a nod. Well, Jody, we can end our meeting here. I'll officially adjourn it, and we can all move to city council meeting. Thank you.
See you in a minute.